The golden sunbeams with their joyous gleams are kindling o'er earth her life and mirth, shedding forth lovely and heart-cheering light. Through the dark hours chill I lay silent and still, but risen at length to gladness and strength, I gaze on the heavens all glowing and bright.
The sun often appears in Paul Gerhardt's hymns as a symbol of new beginnings, of life, of overcoming the darkness. His hymns contain some of the best-known lyrics of German poetry. Their themes are fear and pain, hope and joy. This poet and man of the church was born in the year 1607. He wrote for ordinary people. He never sought fame, but he became famous. In 2007, the 400th anniversary of Paul Gerhardt's birth is being celebrated everywhere in Germany.
I have to admit I'm not too familiar with his hymns and lyrics, but I do recognize some of them, the most famous, and I find them very deep, deeper than many modern songs, and that's why they always touch me.
They still have exactly the same depth of meaning today they had when he wrote them, although that was a few hundred years ago.
I find them very expressive, romantic, poetic, and profound. I never realized he had such a difficult life himself.
Paul Gerhardt was born in the small town of Gräfenhainichen, near Leipzig, on the 12th of March 1607. Shortly thereafter, the town was almost entirely destroyed in the horrors of the 30 Years' War, whose effects would remain with Gerhardt all his life. His parents died while he was still young. At 14, he was already an orphan. He himself always thanked God for the life he'd been granted.
Nun danket all und bringet ihr Menschen in der Welt, dem dessen Lob der Engel Heer im Himmel steht vermählt.
This is the Vokalkonsort Berlin, a renowned chamber ensemble. In this anniversary year, Paul Gerhardt's hymns are being sung especially often. The singers appreciate Gerhardt's use of language, simple and down to earth.
What's special about Paul Gerhardt's lyrics? That's easy, they're real songs. The way the lyrics are written, you automatically begin to sing them. He writes very simply and in a very focused manner, not big ballads, not sonnets, but short four-line verses, each of which dictates its own rhythm, so all you have to do is sing them. That's what's great about Paul Gerhardt.
The castle in Grimma on the river Mulde. Just behind it lies what had once been an Augustinian monastery. It housed the school where Paul Gerhardt was sent. He lived here from 1622 to 1627. His school days were austere and strictly regulated.
Die Schulzeit in Grimma hat man sich, was seine Ausbildungsmöglichkeiten angeht.
You have to think of his school days in Grimma as the best thing that could have happened to him as far as education was concerned.
Grimma
was the elite school, the school of princes. At Grimma, people were trained to take on important positions in politics and administration, or in the church and theology. Life was strictly regulated there. It was a boarding school with a monastic order. But all in all, Grimme provided a very solid basic education. And that was also important for his university studies.
Gerhardt was 21 when he went to Wittenberg to study theology. The city had suffered severely during the 30 Years' War, but at the time the most important Lutheran theological faculty was there. The philosophy and teachings of the reformer Martin Luther shaped Gerhardt's theology studies. He received a solid education and lived near the Wittenberg Stadtkirche, the church where Luther used to preach. Paul Gerhardt spent 14 years in Wittenberg. It's not known just how long he studied there, only that he worked for a long time as a tutor in this house, which belonged to the Wittenberg pastor. In 1642, Gerhardt left Wittenberg. He was 35 years old and looking for work. He tried his luck in Berlin. It was there that he wrote his first lyrics.
For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from Him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. My fortress, I shall not be shaken. On God rests my deliverance and my honor. My mighty rock, my refuge is in God.
The hymn Meine Seele, My Soul, in a contemporary version, with music composed in 2007. Kirche, St. Nicholas Church, is the oldest in Berlin. At the time Paul Gerhardt arrived, it already rose imposingly over the city centre. He was still calling himself a theology student. He failed to find a position with the church. How could he earn a living? Once again, he worked as a tutor. Berlin had also been scarred by the turmoil of the war that had been raging through German territories. The changing armies had provisioned themselves from the city. Of 1,000 houses, 500 were empty. And time and again the plague raged ferociously. This period saw the death of nearly half of the inhabitants of the March of Brandenburg, the region in which Berlin lies. Gerhardt had forged links to the parish of St. Nicholas. 2 memorial plaques at the entrance to the church now commemorate him and the cantor Johann Krüger. He became friends with Krüger and showed him his first lyrics. And Krüger supported him.
Auf Johann Krüger traf hier in Berlin.
It was here in Berlin that he met Johann Krüger. It was certainly one of the great moments of Lutheran church music and Lutheran hymns. And Krüger was actually the person who discovered Paul Gerhardt. Because of his book, Gerhardt's lyrics became familiar and famous. Krüger himself wrote music for those lyrics, and he also used the melodies of other composers.
In 1647, Johann Krüger published his hymnal, Praxis Pietatis Mellica, the practice of godliness in Christian and comforting songs. It contains 18 hymns by Paul Gerhardt. That brought the poet to public notice. Many more hymns by Paul Gerhardt appeared in the following years in new editions of the hymnal. They were sung in many churches. They became well known and appreciated. Soon their author was, too.
O Lord, how shall I meet you? How welcome you aright? Your people long to greet you, my hope, my heart's delight. O kindle, Lord most holy, a lamp within my breast, to do in spirit lowly all that may please you best.
Wie soll ich dich empfangen und wie begegn ich dir? O alle Welt verlangen, o meine Seele Ziel. O Jesu, Jesu, setze mir selbst die Fackel bei, damit was dich ergetze, mir kund und wissend sei. Dein Zion streut dir Palmen und grüne Zweige hin, und ich will dir in Psalmen ermuntern meinen Sinn. Mein Herz soll dir grünen in stetem Lob und Preis und deinem Namen dienen, so gut es kann und weiß.
Ah ja, schön.
In 1651, Paul Gerhardt applied for a position that had become available just outside Berlin. He became provost in Mittenwalde. Nowadays, Christoph Kurz is the minister at St. Moritz Church in Mittenwalde, in which Paul Gerhardt served.
When Paul Gerhardt came to Mittenwalde, the 30 Years' War had just ended 3 years earlier. Mittenwalde had suffered greatly. Its population was reduced by 3/4. Many farms were severely damaged and deserted. Illness and epidemics had left their mark. And then he came to this village as pastor, provost and spiritual advisor.
At his ordination, like every Lutheran minister, Gerhardt committed himself to the Book of Concord, the doctrinal standard of the Lutheran faith, including the Formula of Concord. Later on, this commitment was to become extremely significant in his life. He married the daughter of a Berlin lawyer in whose home he had been a tutor. Finally, he was able to support a family of his own. He preached and led daily devotions. The book of church records he kept has been preserved. In it, he noted tidily all the christenings, deaths and marriages in his church. And he continued to write verses. He wrote lyrics that number among the most beautiful that German Baroque poetry has to offer. Perhaps it was the flowering meadows around Mittenwalde that inspired Paul Gerhardt to write a famous summer hymn that seeks and finds God in the beauty of nature.
Go forth, my heart, and seek delight in all the gifts of God's great might, these pleasant summer hours. Look how the plains for thee and me have decked themselves most fair to see, all bright and sweet with flowers.
Geh aus, mein Herz, und suche Freud in dieser lieben Sommerzeit an deines Gottes Gabe. Schau, was der schönen Gärten zieh, und siehe, wie sie mehr und wild sich ausgeschmückt haben, sich ausgeschmückt
In 1656, Anna Maria and Paul Gerhardt had a daughter, Maria Elisabeth, but she soon died. A memorial plaque hangs in the Mittenwalde church, dedicated by the parents to their deceased child. Paul Gerhardt saw this altar every day. One of its decorations depicts a well-known Christian motif, the veil of Saint Veronica. It inspired him to write a passion hymn.
O sacred head, now wounded with grief and shame weighed down, now scornfully surrounded with thorns, thy only crown. O sacred head, what glory, what bliss till now was thine, yet, though despised and gory, I joy to call thee mine.
Paul Gerhardt ist Teil unseres Kulturgutes.
Paul Gerhardt is part of our culture. That's connected to the fact that he was able to write poems that were like folk songs. And he's become part of the history of the arts. That has to do with the fact that Johann Sebastian Bach often set his lyrics to music in cantatas and oratorios.
Auch vertont hat.
In the St. Matthew Passion, there's a place where the evangelist reports on Jesus' death, and Jesus cried out, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" And then it says again, "And Jesus cried out again and passed away." And at that point, Johann Sebastian Bach brings in a Paul Gerhardt chorale. Wenn ich einmal soll scheiden, so scheide nicht von mir.
My Savior, be thou near me when death is at my door. Then let thy presence cheer me. Forsake me nevermore. When soul and body languish, oh, leave me not alone. But take away mine anguish by virtue of thine own.
In 1657, Paul Gerhardt returned to Berlin. He was made second deacon at the Nikolaikirche. In the years that followed, his life darkened increasingly. 3 more times he had to experience the birth of a child and its death soon afterwards. Moreover, Gerhardt became involved in the religious quarrel raging between the Lutheran clerics and the Calvinist Prince-Elector of Brandenburg, Friedrich Wilhelm. For political reasons, the Prince-Elector wanted Prussia to be Calvinist, overriding dissenting opinions among the population and the clergy. In what was described as an edict of tolerance, he demanded that all Lutheran ministers recognize Calvinism. He broke down resistance by dismissing or expelling those who refused to do so. Paul Gerhardt was a devout Lutheran. He couldn't agree with the Prince-Elector's edict. It encroached too closely on his faith by banning a section of the Book of Concord, the Formula of Concord. Gerhardt refused to bow to the Prince-Elector's wishes. So in 1666 he was relieved of his office. At the age of 60, he had no means of earning a living.
Wenn man sich die Zeit anschaut, wie der Kurfürst die
When you look at that period, at the way the Prince-Elector spied on the pastors who didn't obey him, removed them from office, persecuted them, and expelled some of them from the city. When you go into it in detail, you can only be amazed at how Paul Gerhardt, in his own personal situation, 4 children were dead, and his wife died at this point, had the steadfastness to say, "No, I will not bow to the Prince-Elector's ideas. My commitment is more important to me than political opportunism."
Ist mir wichtiger als politische Opportunität.
Commit thou all thy griefs and ways into his hands, to his sure truth and tender care, who heaven and earth commands. Who points the clouds their course, whom winds and seas obey. He shall direct thy wandering feet, he shall prepare thy way.
Once again, Paul Gerhardt moved on. He found a new position in Lübben, in the marshy Spreewald region. The town lay in electoral Saxony, so the Prince-Elector of Brandenburg had no power there. Nowadays, Pastor Olaf Bayer works in Lübben's Paul Gerhardt Church.
1669 kam Paul Gerhardt.
Paul Gerhardt came to Lübben from Berlin in 1669. Here he was no longer in the Prince-Elector's sphere of influence. Here he was in Saxony and could preach what he wanted. I imagine people sang his hymns here too, and he was, this has been handed down from his time in Lübben, a good spiritual advisor who took a great deal of trouble about people, although he was already at an age where various things were harder to do. He could no longer go along with everything in the church community. We know that, but it's said he was a good spiritual advisor.
Das wissen wir, aber es heißt, war ein guter Seelsorger.
Sarah Kaiser sings Paul Gerhardt's lyrics in a very different, more contemporary setting. She composes jazz and soul music to the verses the poet wrote.
The special appeal is simply that he speaks about eternal things, and not things like, "Oh, I like you so much and it's a lovely day." He speaks from experience, the 30 Years' War, the many good people left behind. And what matters after that? Where do you find strength? Those are absolutely vital issues, and that makes the difference. But they're linked to and expressed in utterly beautiful poetic and artistic language. That's the appeal. I know of no other poet in Germany who wrote in this way on these subjects.
O sing, my soul, rejoicing, sing lovely songs of grace to God, from whom all creatures derive their rightful place. I offer God the Most High my praises while on earth. I'll sing to him and praise him as long as I have breath.
Meine Seele singe wohl auf und singe schön, in welchem alle Dinge zu Dienst und Willen stehen. Ich will
secret of Paul Gerhardt's hymns? Is it their simplicity, their straightforwardness? Their message speaks to both princes and the man on the street. Both absorb it, take it with them, and pass it on. In the church in Lübben hangs the portrait that's the source of all other pictures of Gerhardt. It was painted shortly after his death. On the 7th of June, 1676, Paul Gerhardt was buried here.